Now, the term minor mineral might suggest to some people that these minerals are less important than the major minerals, but that is simply not the case. We just need them in smaller amounts, but they are nonetheless very important. And one of the minerals that highlights this is iron. Iron, you probably know, is extremely important for the functional capacity of our red blood cells. Iron binds to hemoglobin and allows that hemoglobin to have a site where oxygen can bind. And in fact, 4 sites, 4 iron ions are bonded to hemoglobin within a red blood cell, providing 4 oxygen binding sites. We also have a blood transporting protein associated with our muscles called myoglobin, which also needs iron for oxygen transport. Okay. Something important to talk about with iron is that it has 2 major forms, something called heme iron and non-heme iron. Heme iron, think hemoglobin, think animal products. Okay, heme iron is the type of iron that's part of hemoglobin that we eat when we eat animal products. This type of iron is more bioavailable. It gets absorbed better and it's more available within the body. Non-heme iron, this is the type of iron found in plant products, but remember that plant products can have all these other things like oxalates, phytates, and tannins that negatively impact iron bioavailability. If you are worried about the iron content of your body, and especially if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, something to keep in mind is that vitamin C actually improves iron absorption. So if, let's say, you're eating plant products that are high in iron, to make sure you get as much of that iron out of that, maybe add some red peppers. I know often people think of vitamin C, they think oranges, but red peppers are unbelievably high in vitamin C. Add that in, or something else with vitamin C in it, or drink some orange juice with that food, and that can improve the iron availability within plant products. One of the most common dietary deficiencies is iron deficiency. And there's various stages of iron deficiency. You're not just gonna be deficient in iron for a week and develop iron deficiency anemia. This is the last stage. You have to deplete iron from many stores in order to finally reach iron deficiency anemia. But this is quite compromising condition. Like with any type of anemia, we're gonna feel lethargic, we're gonna feel tired, people are going to feel weak, typically pale skin. These are common symptoms of anemia, okay? In severe cases, it can lead to an irregular heartbeat, and in infants and children can compromise growth. So it's a big deal, and we want to make sure we get enough iron. Like we said, vegans and vegetarians, these are people that especially need to be careful that they're getting enough iron, especially if they're women, because women lose blood with their menstrual cycle, losing iron in the process, especially if they're athletes, because athletes have a higher need for iron in order to transport all the oxygen needed for energy availability. And pregnancy increases the need for iron as well. So those are all conditions. So women in general are much more likely to have an iron deficiency, especially if they're an athlete, especially if they are a vegan or a vegetarian. Okay, and like I said, iron deficiency anemia, it's the last stage of iron deficiency and most severe stage. Iron can be toxic at high levels, leading to a whole slew of different symptoms. We typically don't get into iron toxicity from, again, foods. It's typically from oversupplementation, as always. We do have a hormone called hepcidin, which helps to regulate iron levels in the body to make sure they don't get too high. And it actually suppresses iron absorption when iron levels are high. So it's really hard to get into iron toxicity from food. Like we said, it's usually from supplementation. Severe iron toxicity typically occurs when someone just takes too much iron supplements in one dose. And I have this picture here because some of these kind of look like candies. I would say that kind of looks like a candy there. That might even look like a candy there. And iron toxicity has historically typically occurred when children have mistaken their parents' iron supplements for candies and taken way too many. Okay, it can lead to organ failure, coma, and death with this iron poisoning. And it's important to call like a poison control hotline immediately or get someone to a hospital immediately if this occurs. Okay. Another super important mineral that's widely available in the body is something called zinc. And this is responsible for a whole slew of enzymatic reactions. It's also especially important in something called gene expression. There are these structures called zinc fingers that facilitate gene expression, facilitate the process of taking a DNA code and transcribing that into a functional protein. Zinc is also a part of certain antioxidants as well, so it is fairly important, as we can see. Luckily, it tends to be abundant in the diet. Okay. Manganese, another cofactor in a lot of important enzymatic reactions. Deficiency, toxicity, rare. Copper is another trace mineral that's involved in red blood cell synthesis. It's also really important in iron absorption. So a copper deficiency can actually negatively impact iron status. So it's important to get enough of this. Copper is also found in like magnetic bracelets. It was really fashionable like 10 years ago. I found a lot of people were wearing these magnetic bracelets that had these purported effects to like fix arthritis or to reduce like nausea, all these kind of effects that were never really scientifically proven. So there's no quality evidence to support their use as a therapeutic remedy. In addition to these copper bracelets, copper itself has been studied for its role in cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's, but again, insufficient evidence base to recommend it. When I say insufficient evidence base to recommend it, that doesn't mean it for sure doesn't do anything, or it for sure is good for you, or for sure is bad for you. It means that we don't know yet. It means the science isn't there yet to draw a strong conclusion. However, a lot of the claims you see out in the media or out when people are trying to sell you these products, they make it sound like the science is clear. This is 100% what's going to work for you. And that's just not necessarily supported by good quality scientific evidence. Doesn't mean a relationship doesn't exist. It just means that science hasn't been able to establish it. Copper deficiency is a little more common than some of the other deficiency. About a quarter of Canadians are below the RDA. Remember, that can affect iron levels as well. It also can increase the risk for certain deficiency symptoms like those outlined here. And like we see for almost every mineral, toxicity is typically due to oversupplementation. Iodine, this is an interesting one. Iodine is really important for the synthesis of two thyroid hormones. This is your thyroid gland right here. And two thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. These are hormones that have a bunch of different metabolic effects all over the body. Okay, so they're kind of our metabolism hormones. They help to regulate fuel use, protein synthesis, heartbeat. They're responsible for a whole slew of different processes in the body, and they require iodine to be synthesized. Our main source of iodine is actually table salt. Here in Canada, salt is iodized, meaning that they add iodine into the salt, and part of the reason they do that is to prevent iodine deficiency. Iodine deficiency increases the risk for the formation of something called a goiter. A goiter is an enlarged thyroid gland. So your thyroid gland is about here, okay? This thyroid gland, if you don't have enough iodine in your diet, the thyroid gland, it like tries harder and harder to make T3 and T4, but there's not enough iodine. So what happens is it becomes really inflamed and it leads to kind of a bulging in the neck region, which is somewhat evidenced in this picture here. But like do Google image search for goiter, and you're gonna find some really dramatic goiters that can exist in individuals. Iodine deficiency is actually quite common. It affects more than 20% of the world, and about a quarter of those have clinical symptoms. Okay. In infants, iodine deficiency can lead to something called congenital iodine deficiency syndrome, which used to be called cretinism, but that name has negative connotations, so we don't use it anymore. This one increases the risk for mental deficiency, deaf mutism, overall kind of mental and growth delays. It is quite severe, and that's why iodine is so important to consume during pregnancy. What's interesting is that iodine toxicity can also lead to the formation of goiter because the thyroid gland has so much more iodine to work with that it starts to kind of overproduce. When you think selenium, some of the main things I want you to know is that selenium is an important cofactor for glutathione peroxidase. So again, it works as an antioxidant, helping to minimize the amount of oxidation and damage to the tissues. Something else interesting about selenium is that selenium deficiency plus some sort of secondary stress is known to be responsible for a condition called Keshan disease, which is named after Keshan province in China. Individuals who suffer from Keshan disease have a kind of this rare heart condition that in severe cases can lead to death. And they actually discovered that people in this place in China were at higher risk for this heart problem, and they discovered that the foods they were eating were really low in selenium because the soil was really low in selenium. And this is a concern that we have going into the future as climate change continues to threaten the integrity of our food supply. We believe that the selenium in content of soil is going to continue to go down, and that's why efforts to preserve our environment and to have more of a sustainable food system is so important. Selenium toxicity can happen, but it's typically, again, due to oversupplementation. One interesting case is that there was a supplement being sold that contained selenium in it, and within it, it actually had 200 times the stated amount of selenium that it said on the food label. The manufacturers screwed up, basically. And there was a severe outbreak of selenium poisoning in the people that consumed this product. So like it shows here, there are a whole slew of symptoms that are associated with selenium toxicity, including hair loss, muscle and joint pain. And these individuals that did consume these selenium supplements were at higher risk for these toxicity symptoms. Molybdenum, main thing I want you to know about it is that it is an important cofactor that activates an enzyme that's responsible for breaking down sulfites into a more harmless form. Some individuals, when they do have too much sulfites in the body, they can promote an allergic reaction. It can also promote diarrhea and breathing difficulties at severe levels. So molybdenum is really important for facilitating their breakdown into non-toxic components. The last mineral we want to talk about is fluoride. And fluoride, a lot of people think fluoride and they think teeth. And actually, if I'm being honest with you, fluoride isn't exactly an essential mineral. It's not an essential mineral at all. It is a mineral, but it's not an essential one. Why? Because we don't actually need it for the proper functioning of our body. It does have benefits, but it's not absolutely needed to sustain life. Okay? Fluoride is important for the formation of fluorapatite crystals. So remember we learned about hydroxyapatite crystals that help harden bones. Fluorapatite crystals help harden our teeth, strengthening their enamel. One thing that's interesting about fluoride is that it tends to be quite controversial. Here in Canada, some areas, not all, and the rates really change across the country. Some areas do fluoridate their water. Okay, where they add fluoride into the water as a mechanism to protect the teeth from enamel damage. And according to a lot of people, this is a great public health feat. So it was actually called one of the greatest public health achievements of the 20th century by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States. Fluoridation of the water has been shown to reduce the risk of tooth decay by 35%. And a lot of us don't think of this, but like our teeth are actually really important for nutrition, because if we don't have teeth that are functional and that aren't associated with pain, our ability to break down nutrients and to eat whatever we want is compromised. Many people, however, are against water fluoridation, partly because of the cost, although it's relatively low at the population level. Some people say that I don't want governments to make a decision on what ends up in my water, and I want water to be as pure as possible. I understand that kind of reasoning, and especially that reasoning makes sense since we can get fluoride from toothpaste and treatments. However, honestly, in areas that do have water fluoridation tend to have much better teeth that age better as well. However, if the fluoride levels of the water aren't properly controlled, which they typically are, fluoride in the water does increase the risk of fluorosis. And fluorosis can lead to kind of a molten, kind of a destroyed look to the teeth that can negatively impact their integrity. So fluoride water levels are controlled to make sure, okay, that's enough to reduce tooth decay, but not so much that it promotes fluorosis. So that's an overview of the minor minerals. Congratulations, we're almost done this course, only 2 more units to go. Like I mentioned, I recommend for both the vitamin and the mineral units to go through each of these micronutrients, write out its functions, symptoms of toxicity, symptoms of deficiency, and sources. Sometimes a table like that ends up on an exam.